First, I want to thank everyone for coming to the presentation today on the tentative budget. Being informed about the budget is very important because it affects all of us. It affects our ability to serve our students and each of our departments. So, knowing where the budget is and the outlook is very important. And I believe in being transparent with everything about the budget and about anything in my area of business and administrative services. So I'm glad you're here, and I'm actually very happy to see the good turnout that we're having this morning. So we'll be talking about the tentative budget for next year, 2017-18, which begins on July 1st. The tentative budget, how the state law works is, the tentative budget is a temporary budget, right? So the governor signs the budget into law usually sometime around July 1st, and then districts have to have the final budget approved by the Board of Trustees by September 15th. So the law states that we have to have a budget in place on July 1st. So that's what this is. It's a tentative budget, a temporary budget, until we have the final budget signed into law or approved by the Board of Trustees by September 15th. But just some recent news that came out before we get into the presentation on the tentative budget, the governor actually signed into law the budget yesterday afternoon. And although I don't have the details have not been released yet, I have reviewed summary schedules from the budget, and it looks very similar, from what I can tell, to the May revise. So the May revise is what the tentative budget was based on. So far, it looks very promising, and I'll have more information by later today once that information comes out of Sacramento. But our presentation today, first I'm going to talk about statewide budget as it relates to community colleges, and then we'll talk specifically about PCC's budget. So the state budget, total expenditures statewide, it's about $125 billion, and that's a slight increase, about $1 billion more than what it was last year. Overall, education, K through 12 and community colleges and the higher ed, CSUs and UC systems are doing pretty well. They're seeing some increases in the budget, not huge increases, but overall it's a very strong budget for education and community colleges. There have been some cuts at the state level for things such as health and human services and also general budget operations. But overall for education, community colleges specifically, we are seeing some slight increases in the budget. And some of the unrestricted general fund increases you'll see on the screen, these again were part of the May revise issued by the governor, and this was used for the assumptions included in our budget. So there's a 1% increase in access for students, and what that means is we'll see a 1% increase in the number of FTEs that we can serve system-wide for all 113 community colleges. What that means for PCC is funding of $1.2 million, and that equates to 240 FTEs. And currently statewide, there's between 30 to 40 colleges that are in stabilization. They're not able to meet their target. So while the budget includes the potential for 1% increase, there's the possibility for higher increases for colleges who are exceeding that 1% growth. Because what the Chancellor's Office does in Sacramento is they'll take the total funding, the $57.8 million, and allocate that out at the beginning of the year. The colleges that don't reach their target, they won't receive that funding. Colleges that exceed their target, the funding left on the table by the colleges not meeting their target will be reallocated, redistributed to the colleges who exceed their target. The second item is actually great news, general operating allocation increase, system-wide $186.3 million, and that's unrestricted general fund dollars. And for PCC, that equates to about $3.6 million that we'll be receiving. And I say that's good news, it's because it's unrestricted general fund. And although it's unrestricted, the Chancellor's Office and the Governor's Office is highly suggesting that these funds be used for cost escalations such as PERS STIRS increases. PERS STIRS increase for Pasadena next year alone will be $2 million increase This year, 16-17, we also had a $2 million increase in expense. So I'll talk about that more in a couple slides that follow. But it is good news that $3.6 million is coming, and that's something that we can use to offset cost escalations such as PERS and STIRS. COLA, there's a COLA included in the May revise, and I'm very hopeful that when I get the details from the signed budget that the COLA will remain. The COLA system-wide, $97 million, and for PCC that equates to about $2 million. So it's very positive impact for our operating budget. And why I'm cautious about the COLA, because the last few years, COLA has been included in the January budget release, the May revise, and when the budget was finally signed into law, there was no COLA, it was taken out. But so far, it's looking promising that the COLA will remain. And if anyone has any questions as we go through the slide, feel free to ask, or you're welcome to ask if I don't cover anything toward the end of the discussion. So the next slide, we look at restricted funding. So there's some restricted one-time funding that's coming to community colleges. And the major item is a new guided pathways program. And the funding for that system-wide will be $150 million. And I don't know exactly how much will be coming to PCC at this point in time. Trailer bill language has not been released, how those funds will be allocated. But I anticipate probably somewhere between $1.5 to $2.5 million, maybe $3 million.
Are we going to have to apply for that funding?
No.
Or they're just going to give it to us?
It'll be given, but how it'll be allocated, that part hasn't come out yet. I anticipate it'll be allocated not on FTES, but more looking at the socioeconomic factors of the areas that we service within our district.
Are we going to have to report out on whether or not we actually develop the guided pathways?
All of that information will come out in trailer bill language. Really, at this point in time, no details have been provided. Next item is funding for scheduled maintenance and instructional equipment. When I first saw this amount, I was pleased. Almost $136 million, and if PCC received about 2%, that would be about $2.5 million, which would have been great news for us. However, when I read into the details of the budget language, most of that funding isn't set to be provided to colleges until 2018-19, so not 17-18, but the following year. So really it's dependent on revenues that the state receives. So at this point in time, instead of over close to $3 million, we're looking at maybe $200,000, which is a very small amount. But that could change with the final budget that's signed into law. I don't anticipate a major increase in that amount, though. But that was a disappointing area. The good news is that the year that we're concluding, we received over $3 million for instructional equipment scheduled maintenance, and those funds can be used over 3 years. So we do have projects identified, and most of the funds have been used, but we do still have funding that we can use over the next 2 years on that. Proposition 39 is funding for clean energy projects, such as LED lighting, more efficient heating and cooling systems. We should receive about $800,000, and those funds can be spent over a few years also. But this will be the last year that we'll receive funding for that program unless it's extended, because it was a five-year program, and this is the 5th year of that program. So I wanted to share some cautions and concerns related to the budget. First of all, the economy. California's economy is very strong right now. However, we've been in economic recovery for almost 8 years, and the typical economic recovery lasts for about 5 years. So the governor's office, the Department of Finance in Sacramento are all providing caution that while the economy is strong, it is robust right now, we have been in economic recovery for 3 years more than the average time. So there is caution that we could slip into a recession. All indicators that I see show the economy still very strong. Unemployment numbers that were just released put California at 4.7% unemployment, which matches the all-time low for unemployment, which we last saw in the year 2000. The federal economic level, U.S., is about 4.3%. So, while those are low numbers, a lot of people have been out of the system a while, so they actually, aren't being counted in that number. But still, 4.7 is a low number. Also, political uncertainties with the transition at the federal level. We don't know a lot about what's going to happen with federal laws and regulations. So it's just an uncertainty that I keep my eye on all the time about possible implications for PCC's budget and the California system-wide. So that's an uncertainty that we don't have all the details yet. STRS and PERS, it's a huge impact to our budget. And what you'll see on the slide, hopefully everyone can see that, is you can see the employer contribution rates. So that's the percent for every dollar earned by an employee that the college must send to PERS or STRS. So you can see in 2016-17, for STRS, the rate is 12.58%. That goes up each year over the next 4 years. By the time we're at 2021, instead of paying 12 cents for every dollar, we're paying 19 cents, so 19.1%. So it's a huge impact to our budget. PERS is actually going up more. It's going up from 13.89% all the way up to almost 25%. So for every dollar a PERS employee earns by the year 2021, we'll have to pay 25 cents to the pension contribution. So it's a huge impact to our budget. And just putting it in another manner, the annual increase in our annual operating budget will be $7 million by the year 2021. So in 2021, we'll be spending $7 million more each year than we currently spend this year on PERS STRS contributions. And 7%, it's a huge part of our overall operating budget. What are we doing to address that? So, we recognize that the PERS STRS rates will be going up and it will require a larger draw on our operating budget. So over the past 6 months, we've proactively established a new fund, Fund 69, which is a PERS STRS contingency fund. And we had some one-time funding come from the state this year, and we had some funding identified to meet that purpose from our last year's budget. So in total, we transferred about $5.3 million to this Fund 69. And what that'll be used for is over the next few years, when the costs keep growing, rather than have a deficit budget, we can transfer from that $5.3 million to cover the shortfall that we have. If the state provides relief, additional funding to cover the PERS STRS obligation, then we can transfer that $5.3 million to serve other needs at the college. Could go back into the general fund, could be used for scheduled maintenance, instructional equipment. We'll have discussions at the campus to identify the best use for that funds if they aren't needed. But at this point in time, it looks like they will be needed for the PERS STRS obligation. Another item of concern is our other post-employment benefit liability. This is the liability that the district has for employees who work a certain amount of years and retire at 55 or over. Basically, if an employee works, depending on the negotiating group, it's 11 years or 15 years, the district will cover health benefits from 55 until they're covered until 65, and then provide an allowance after that going forward. So the liability of our district is about $31 million. So that's based on all of our existing employees, the actuarial estimate of what that liability would be, and also for employees who have already retired who we provide that benefit to. So our liability is $31 million. We have set aside about $14 million, and each year we should be contributing about $1 to $4 million to increase our money set aside for that liability. So that's an area that we need to keep our eyes on just to make sure it's sufficiently funded, because if it's not, if we don't have a plan in place, it would be a problem from an accreditation standpoint, and also a problem that we want to make sure that we can sustain the benefits we provide to all of our employees who retire and put in the years of service. So something that we did recently also related to this other post-employment benefit liability is we had discussions college-wide. This was discussed heavily at BRAC over 3 meetings, and a recommendation came from BRAC, our Budget and Resource Allocation Committee, to establish an irrevocable trust. So an irrevocable trust is a trust that we can transfer our balance in, and those funds can earn a higher rate of return. Currently, the $14 million I mentioned that's set aside, those funds are invested with the county, and they're earning at most 1% return. So very minimal return. Over the last several years, our annual return on that investment has been $100,000 at best in a given year. So very low return. I don't know about everyone here, but if I had $14 million, which I don't, but if I did, I would definitely expect a higher return than $100,000 on that investment. But what an irrevocable trust allows us to do is invest in higher rate returns that are still safe. And I anticipate that we could have returns of 5, 7, close to 10%. And what that would do, the funding that we have and the earnings on that would almost cover all of the required ARC payment, annual required contribution, for the OPEB liability. Currently, this is a draw on our general fund. We contribute $1 to $2 million if the funding is available. But with the irrevocable trust, it will relieve much of that draw on the general fund, and the general fund will have more general fund to use other uses. So I wanted to provide a snapshot on our FTS. So this just shows the incredible job that our college has done over the last few years. In the year 2013-14, our FTS, Tito, do you want to move over? You okay? I don't want you to get a stiff neck. Yeah. 2013-14, our FTS was 21,243, which is a pretty good number compared to other community colleges. We've grown that number each year to where we currently are in 16-17, where it looks like we're going to reach our target of almost 24,000, and with 1% growth, we'll be at 24,227 next year. And putting it in different terms, from 13-14 to 16-17, we've grown an annual total amount of 2745 FTS, which is just demonstrating that we're serving our communities, serving our students, and providing the classes that they need to get through and either transfer, enter the workforce, or whatever our students' goals are. That's 12.9%. And also demonstrates the quality work of every area within our college. Our facilities are clean, our instruction is top-notch, our student services is excellent, and that helps draw the student populations that we serve. So the next slide it's a snapshot of our total general fund budget, the tentative budget that was adopted by the board on June 7th for 17-18. So you'll see the major components of revenue. Our total revenue is $155.1 million, and total expenses of the same amount. So what you'll see is a balanced budget. Past several years we've had deficit budgets, but this is a balanced budget. And looking at the state apportionment, $133.8 million, that's the largest of our revenue items. Also see lottery coming in at $3.4 million, and non-resident tuition, $9.3 million. So non-resident tuition is very important. Our non-resident students, it increases the diversity for our campus community and also provides a healthy revenue stream for us. Looking at the expenses, salary and benefits, No surprise is the largest expense item, coming in at 85.5% of the total expenses. You'll see operating expenses, 16.1 million. And in the next 3 slides, I'm going to provide information on the revenue, expenses, and transfers that compares the 16-17 numbers to the 17-18 numbers. So you'll see, what's the comparison, what's changing compared to where we currently are. So the first slide is revenue assumptions. So these are the major revenue assumptions included in the tentative budget. So the base allocation, which we talked about in the second slide, that's an additional $3.6 million for our operating budget. Included in the tentative budget is COLA, almost $2 million. Enrollment growth, $1.2 million. The last 2 items I wanted to point out because these are reductions compared to 16-17. So in 16-17, we received one-time funding from the state for state mandated claims and one-time revenue, a little over $5 million. Those were one-time funding sources that we received in 16-17 that are not provided in the budget for next year. So I wanted to point out that we do have positive, but we also have negative assumptions in our budget. But in total, the total revenue that is included in the tentative budget is almost $1.8 million higher than where we are currently in 16-17. Next, when we look at the expense assumptions, the first item is total compensation. So total compensation is all of the compensation that is provided to employees. So the first thing that comes to most people's mind is salary, right? So salary is part of the total compensation. The tentative budget does not include any salary increases. That's because negotiations have not been completed, and the assumption for the tentative budget was, what do we know? And nothing has been concluded yet, so the assumption is 0 salary increase. But we're still seeing a 2% increase in the total compensation because you'll see the PERS and STIRS contribution, that's part of total compensation. Though that's an expense the district pays for the pension that, for the benefit of employees. And because the PERS STIRS increase, we're seeing a 2% increase. There's also a slight increase built into the budget for health benefits. Faculty positions, there's a net increase in expense as a result of hiring additional faculty, and that comes to about $1.2 million. We have a decrease, and included in the budget is a 1% increase in our general operating expenses. So that's across the board, and that comes at a cost of $505,000. There's a decrease in transfers to other funds, which I'm going to cover in our next slide, of about $2 million. So this slide shows a recap of our different funds, where the transfers are coming from and where they're going to. So the total is 0 because it's where funds are coming from and where they're going to. All of the transfers are coming from our general fund. Included in the tentative budget is a transfer out of $3.5 million. And you'll see all of the other funds, those are the funds where those funds are transferring to. $36,000 to our Child Development Center Fund. Our Capital Outlay Fund is receiving a transfer in of $600,000. Property and liability insurance, $1.4 million. OPEB, our OPEB liability account, transferring in $1 million. Once the irrevocable trust that I mentioned earlier is up and running and earning investments, this type of investment could potentially be reduced significantly. And you'll see the last one, Fund 69, that's our PERS STIRS Contingency Fund. So we have projected in the tentative budget an augmentation of that fund by almost $500,000. So by the end of this year, that fund will be $5.3 million. By the end of 17-18, it'll be $5.8 million. And then the following year, the following 2 years, I have a 5-year projection. It's when we start drawing on that fund in the event that additional resources don't become available from the state. This slide, I think it's a very helpful slide. It's a snapshot of all of the district's funds. So it's very transparent. It shows all of our funds from our general fund, Fund 01, our restricted general fund, our capital fund, our Measure P fund. So this is all the funding that the district has. So the projected beginning balance is our balance that we'll start July 1st with. And it's projected because we still need to close the books, do all our accounting entries. But these are the amounts that we project to begin the year with. Then you'll see a column for income, expenditures, transfers, and you notice the transfers, that's the same transfers that we reviewed in the previous slide. And then the net activity is the sum of the income, expenditures, and transfers. And then the projected ending balance, which will be our balance for June 30th of next year. So I just wanted to call your attention to the total amount. So when you look at the total amount, the total projected beginning balance, $57.5 million. And when you look at the ending balance, it's $46 million. I don't want, I don't want everyone to think, wow, are we drawing down our resources by $11 million? What's happening? How's that working? But actually, it's a strategic reduction, because if you notice, Measure P, which is Fund 42, that has a balance of $6.2 million in the beginning balance. But Measure P, we intend to fully utilize all of those funds and complete all of the projects. So that fund we anticipate will be fully used. So you're seeing a 6.2 reduction in that one line item. Similar reductions in Fund 41, our capital outlay fund. We have a $2.4 million reduction there. And that's for projects that we plan to complete this year. In our scheduled maintenance fund, something very similar. So the reductions that we're seeing in the total of all of our funds are strategic in nature. That really concludes the presentation. I'll be happy to answer any questions related to the budget. Let me just make a couple other comments. The tentative budget, what we did last year is when the tentative budget was approved, we loaded a percent of the budget in the banner. So like 75%, I believe, is the percent that was used. And that created hardships for a lot of our operating departments, because if they're setting up an annual contract and the annual contract required 100% of that line item budget, the contract couldn't be established in banner. This year what we did, we loaded 100% of the tentative budget. So we won't have that issue for this year. Can I answer any questions about the budget? Any questions at all? Yes?
When will our budgets be due?
I'll defer that to Hedva.
It's there.
It's there.
You know what, it's safe to say July 1st. Or it's there, we're gonna have, let's just say July 1st.
Yes?
Yeah, Richard, who sets the employer contribution for
PERS and STIRS do.
So they're telling us how to partition those contributions.
And the reason why we're seeing huge increases, that's a great question. The reason why we're seeing huge increases in PERS and STIRS, what PERS and STIRS do, they collect these contributions and they invest in stock market, real estate, very safe investments. But they rely on the returns on those investments to cover the distribution to retirees. If those investments aren't providing returns at a sufficient level, then they have to increase the contribution rates from employees or the employer. In recent years, they have not been receiving the returns that they projected, actually much lower than they anticipated. So that's why we're seeing these huge increases. And it comes directly from PERS and STIRS. And we're not alone with this issue. It's every community college, every K-12, the CSUs, the UCs, basically every agency in the state of California that has an employee has this issue. For community colleges alone, it's a $400 million increase in annual expenses. So Pasadena is very proactive in what we're doing, the establishment of this Fund 69, but relief is going to have to come from the state in the form of additional funding. Otherwise, a lot of state agencies will be faced with very difficult decisions to make in order to cover their contribution rates.
So if you have an individual question about your cost center. And would you prefer that we direct a question, to you, to Hedvig, to Joe? I'm not sure that we had an individual question about things that we've worked on, task streamed or whatever over the course of the last couple of years. Whom would we direct that conversation and whom would we have that meeting with, as opposed to a general question?
You can start with Lacania.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, thank you.
I can see the tentative budget is based upon the adopted budget for 16-17. So again, as Richard said, it's tentative, it's a placeholder, and will be tweaked at adopted this year.
But Bones had a question. If he had a question about his specific budget,
Yeah, right.
who can he ask?
When he looks at it, he says, how did it come up with that particular budget? That's where it came from.
May I piggyback with one more question?
Sure, absolutely.
As a piggyback, if there's been a conversation about certain things that have occurred in your area, but there hasn't been a line for that, and we've tried to create that line so in essence you can identify that expense and not use some other unidentifiable number, would that be a Lacania question?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
This is a bit off of our budget, but we're all doing this now up and down the state, looking at the budgets for the 17, 18 year.
Right.
And yet we are aware from what you have said, as well as talk out and about, that we're doing very well in terms of where we are in our FTE. Some of our sister colleges not so well.
Right.
Is there discussion up and down the state with your peers at some level about this trend or this change?
There's a lot of discussion. You know, the decline started a few years ago, and typically it starts when unemployment goes down. Then more people have job opportunities, and they may choose to work as opposed to go to school either full-time or part-time. But I definitely saw a decline in different areas throughout the state, starting about maybe 3 or 4 years ago. Started in Central California. San Diego had some downturn also. But what I noticed, over the last year is a lot of our neighboring community colleges, the enrollment's been very soft. I've seen others in our general area that are currently seeing 2 to 3, even 4% reductions in the number of FTS that they're generating. So there is definitely a concern about that. And from Sacramento, last year we saw enrollment growth system-wide of 2%, and this year it's been reduced to 1% enrollment growth. And I believe that's a direct result that not all colleges are able to meet their target, and rather put a 2%, which some colleges may not be able to attain. Those resources were put in other funding mechanisms, such as the general operating allocation increase. So it is definitely an item of discussion. Yes.
So our area is heavily, our supply budget is heavily dependent on a lot of funds. How does that work? When does the amount determine? I mean, I'm guessing it's kind of like playing the lottery. Sometimes you get more.
What the Chancellor's Office does, they'll provide us a funding amount per FTS, and that's how we're funded. And that's based on the revenue received by the state from the lottery system. So it's a per FTS, and it's been pretty consistent over the last few years.
So it's not really highly varied.
It has not been. It could, but it has not been. It's been a pretty reliable funding source for us.
It always made me very nervous to have to depend on lottery funds.
And it's actually been great for us, a great funding source. It can only be used for instructional supplies or materials, but it's definitely helps out our general fund here at PCC and all other community colleges in the K-12 system.
Is that going to be loaded in about the same level?
It's going to be about the same level. Yeah. Did I see a hand up? Yes, Tito.
I mentioned that the starting budget, again, the 40% starting July 1 is going to be based off the adopted budget from 16-17.
What this budget is, it's a tentative budget, but basically our assumptions were it's a rollover budget. So the budget that was provided in 16-17, there were not any decreases, but also there were not any increases, because we didn't want to make the false assumption that increase would come when we don't have that with the final budget. Now that the final budget's been signed into law yesterday, as soon as the details come out about that budget, we'll be in a position of, what types of increases can we absorb within the total budget. But right now, I didn't want to reduce anybody's budget, and so right now it's a rollover budget. So the tentative budget is the same as it was in 16-17.
Well, the closing number, right? Because obviously we start off with 75. Last year's going to be whatever it is right now.
No, you get 100%. 100% will be loaded. It has been loaded. Any other? Dave?
Sorry.
It's okay. No. Any question?
We have been trying for a couple of years to consolidate a couple of cost centers, to reduce the 12 cost centers that are recommended. Who would be the best person?
You could work with HEDVA and Lacania on that. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. Cost centers are great. It's good to have a tracking mechanism in as much detail as you prefer. But if it's not providing useful information, you can definitely, there is the opportunity to consolidate those. Same token, if you would like to separate a cost center, you can do that if you need more reporting information. Lizette, did you have a question, or are you okay? No? Okay. If there's no other questions, we have two other, you can always send me an email or call. We have our Budget and Resource Allocation Committee. You're welcome to attend those meetings. They happen every month. We also have two other forums that are scheduled. At the next forum, the next two will happen in July, and I should have more information about the budget that was signed into law that I can share at that forum. But we also post information to our BRAC website. This presentation will be uploaded there. All of our BRAC meetings are videotaped and posted there, as well as our agenda meeting notes. But if you have any question, my goal is to make sure that the budget is transparent, it's hopefully easy to understand, and everyone knows where we are. Because the budget, it directly impacts how we can serve our students, and at the end of the day, that's what we're here to do, serve our students. So if we have a clear idea of the budget, the resources that are available, it helps us accomplish that goal. Okay? Thank you again for attending. I really appreciate it.